Hi, I'm Justin Moorman.
And I'm Katie Thornton, and this is the Re-Education of Schools podcast,
where we have open, honest conversations about how to better understand social-emotional learning, trauma-informed care, the whys behind student behavior, and how to help kids navigate it all as they go through school and life.
Hey, welcome back to the second part of episode 23. We're going to pick right back up where we left off from the previous episode. Enjoy.
I think that one of the biggest shifts that we need to make is like how we're preparing our teachers.
100%.
And because the adults are ultimately the crucial step in all of this. And I think that we don't necessarily always do a great job of preparing our teachers to handle the stuff that they're having to handle. So I've worked with very, very few people. And I've worked with a lot of people over my career at this point. And I've worked with, I could definitely count on one hand, and I don't know that it's more than like one or two people that I've ever worked with. Don't work with any currently, so that's a plus. That I would say are completely unwilling to change, or that don't want to be better in some way, or don't want to improve their practices. I can say I've worked with maybe every now and again you might come across somebody, right? But overall, I see people that want to do well and they want to improve. And so what does that mean? It means that if people want to get better and they're wanting to grow, they're wanting to improve their practices, but they're not improving their practices and they're not growing, then what's the hang up, right? Yeah. That's what we have to ask ourselves. Why isn't that happening? And I think that it's because schools either and districts, they may not know, one, they may not be putting in the real time or effort toward training their people on student behavior or trauma-informed care or anything else like that. Yep. But I think there's also reasons why. Right? It's like layers. You keep going down, you keep peeling away the layers of an onion, right? Okay, so then what's the reason that they're not putting in all this time, and giving it more effort and giving it more prominence in all the trainings? And I think that you come down to things like a lack of people to do the training that really know what they're talking about. Yep. I think that's one of them. So if I don't have people to do the training, it's probably easier just to ignore the training and talk about something else than it is to go ahead and try to train people or try to train somebody to be able to train people, right? It's just easier to just kind of pretend like it's not there and keep moving. I think that there's a reliance, too much of a reliance on one-off PD sessions still. Yep. I think those serve their purpose in the world of trauma-informed care, and they serve their purpose in training staff. We do them. I'm not saying that they're not worth anything. Yep. But I think if that's our only thing, then we're not going to get people there. Schools aren't going to get people there.
We don't have systems set up to actually, when you go back to do the real work, there's no system to go to process, to talk through. Because again, we're talking about people, and each little individual child, when you come in your door, every year is going to be different. So what is the system after that person magically, right? Yeah. I agree with you.
Yeah. And so and that's the thing too, right? We can't teach people a program in a one-off PD for trauma-informed care because there isn't a program for it. We can teach people a program in one-off PDs or in a series of PD sessions for how to run a specific reading program. Yeah. We do that. And then we see, again, I'm blown away by some of these, academic programs that people put out, and watch how kids get so much better at reading, and literally you're following a script. I can sit and I can follow a script with a student I'm working with now, and then I watch the kid know how to read. It's crazy to watch, right? Yeah. We get so used to that we want that same thing with this. Yeah. With behavior. We want it with trauma-informed. We want it with classroom management. We want it with those things that you can't have it with. And then people get confused, rightfully so, because they want to improve. Yeah. And they can't because it doesn't exist. So there's one-off PDs. I think there's too much of a reliance on that when it comes to this. I think and so then what you're missing then is there's a lack of consistent coaching, right? Right. It's the coaching piece that has to go along with those kind of individual professional development sessions, where you have people checking in, knowing how to walk people through issues as they come up.
Make adjustments for tomorrow. Yeah. Today didn't go well. How do we make adjustments for tomorrow?
Pointing out the great things that are happening at the end of any given day, week, whatever.
Support, encouragement.
Yeah. Getting people to, stick with it. What you're doing is working. I know it doesn't necessarily feel great all the time, but what you're doing is working. Let's stick with it. We're going to stay the course. We're not going to just abandon it. We're going to stick with it. I think those things are things that we miss a lot. And I don't know who we necessarily even expect. I don't know if we ultimately districts expect principals to be that person. I don't know who they expect to be that person, but I think a lot of districts don't have that person, or schools don't have that person to like go do that and to help people in that regard. And so when all those things are the case, like we start to try something and then we just give up too quickly.
Yeah.
And so we give up quickly on training people as well, or we like do a book, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like we do that, but like then there's got to be more to it than that if we want to inspire and implement like real shifts that last over a long time. And so I think those are like a lot of the reasons like why that happens. Right. Which I can get into a habit of saying like, why are all the things the way they are? Well, like that's why I feel like it is the way it is, to go all the way back to the fact that we've got to start preparing our teachers.
Yeah.
That's the lens shift. I think that's one of the biggest lens shifts. We have to start preparing our teachers to be able to actually do this.
Yeah.
I understand there's this whole laundry list of reasons why we're not, that we maybe don't even want to always address or recognize or acknowledge that those are the reasons. But I think those are probably not every reason, but those are part of the reasons that we avoid trying to make that shift in districts or in schools.
Essentially, you're asking somebody to go teach math without going to the math training.
Yeah, exactly.
You're asking teachers to do classroom management with behavior right now, and we know behavior looks different in schools than it ever has before.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It's a lot. We're asking them to go in and go do the thing with zero training and wishing for the best and wondering why it doesn't pan out. Yeah. Right. And so like, how can I keep on thinking going back to, when you talk about trauma informed schools, really the component of trauma informed schools are, does your discipline or school policies, do they support and are aligned with trauma informed practices? So does your school discipline policy does it align with neuroscience, right? Do we put those foundations, is what we're saying, does it reflect who we are?
Yeah.
So if we really believe and we know the science is on our side, does your school policy and discipline protocol align with trauma-informed practices to support all kids? So I think that's just like a bigger lens shift for people to start thinking about. Think about it, like we did that in our building. Like we had to shift discipline or how we set up some of those protocols, and those became systems in our building then, right?
Yeah. To
help support kind of moving forward in that.
Well, and what's interesting too is, again, it's time, right? Yeah. There's a lot of time and you have to be willing to dedicate that time. And you did, over the course of a couple of years, really focus in on a lot of these concepts. And again, I think we answered a lot of questions probably a lot, where it was like, well, what am I supposed to do when? And to keep like kind of nudging people back towards well, it just depends, and that's not the answer that people are looking for in that moment. Like, well, it just depends. Like we need to then like kind of be detectives and figure out what's the best for that kid in that moment, that student in that moment, because what we think, kind of a Ross Green thing, right? What we think is the issue may not even be the issue. And if we're not taking the time to like really take in what the kid is saying, what the student is saying, then we're missing it. And then you feel bad ultimately, because I think my knee-jerk reaction at times can be to get frustrated with a teacher that's not handling stuff well. Yeah. Right. And again, I don't know how you really give a disclaimer. Like my mindset now, again, for people that might be listening from our school, I'm not even necessarily thinking in the terms of the school that we work at right now, but I can hear, you hear things, you watch things, whatever, and you even see stuff on the news, right? And you can get really frustrated at a teacher, and you're like, why in the world would somebody handle it that way? Yeah. What were they even thinking? What a overcorrection in this way, or what a overly big reaction to like what this situation was that I hear about. Yeah. And if I give myself a minute, the reality is I'm like, what did I expect that person to do? Have they ever been told? Have they ever been trained? Yeah. Have they ever been trained to do it better or do it different? Have they ever been had it explained to them why the student was doing the thing they were doing? Yeah. Or why they might have been. And so is it really on that teacher, or is it on somebody else that is on the lack of training? Yeah. And at some point, I think that's where, as you move higher and higher up in a district, you have to, people in those positions have to be aware, and they have to do the hard work of taking the time to make those shifts. All that to say, I kind of got off track there, but like we did that work at the school. Yeah. And not like it's perfect. And the school we work at's not perfect. And there's stuff that goes down that we're like, well, we missed that, or we messed up on that. We got to improve on that. Like, this isn't going well. So hear that. Like, that's not a perfect system.
Yeah.
But I think that's because every year we get new kids.
Yeah.
And every year, like we have to figure out what works for that person.
That new system,
yes,
right?
That's the new system for that kid. It's not a system that they have to fit into. It's a system we have to create for that student. What does that student need?
What is their educational
to be
needs?
successful as a person in our school? Yeah. And so it does take time. That's why at the beginning of years, sometimes it can feel chaotic to any number of teachers, because we're like, oh, like we haven't got it figured out yet. And I think of like the youngest, the classrooms that teach the youngest students in any given school. You know, they're the first ones that get those students.
Yes.
So in our situation, we have a 2nd through 5th grade school. So our 2nd grade teachers, they get these students. Nobody's figured out who they are.
No,
and those kids don't know who they're going to be in our building yet. And so everybody's got to figure it out. And it takes time, and it's uncomfortable, and it can be absolutely like anxiety producing. It can do all kinds of things that are totally normal and okay. Yeah.
Human. Yeah.
But what we unfortunately can't do is say, well, this is going to be the system for like 2nd grade, you know, in this example. And when kids come in, they're just going to have to fit into that system. And if they don't fit into that system, then they're out. You know, we can't do that. We have to say, okay, here's you run your room, do it the best you can, like the way that you normally would run your room, with practices that you've put in place that are highly effective for most of your kids.
Yep.
And then for those small percentage that it's not working for, we're going to have to take the time to actually figure out the whys behind it and what's actually
and make the adjustments.
And here's what I'll say, like, because I know it's always hard when you talk about like a long-term commitment to a training program of like years worth of, you know, that's for a school. Like, I don't know, for a district, I'm not 100% sure how long it does take. I mean, I know it's not going to be months. I mean, I know you're talking years, but what you start to see is both of us start hearing cool conversations of how people have shifted, even if they don't come out and say like, I shifted because of this training.
Yeah.
But they're using the same terms and they're describing the shifts they've made because of some of the trainings, because of some of the understanding.
Yeah. Like just really being more aware of themselves and their own regulation, the relationship piece. And it's never, like you said, it's never perfect. And each kid, you think you have it going on, and then, here comes a transfer kid. Yeah, sure. Or here comes a move-in. Yeah. So now our systems have to adjust because now we have new energy in the building, or, supports and those kind of things. So it is a trial by fire, and like just figuring out people, right? And that's the trick. So if it does come down to people, not programs. I think we've kind of figured that out. What are intentional things we can put in place to support our students and families then?
Well, I mean, I think what we do with good intentions is we build those systems or programs that work for us, and then we try to cram those students into those systems, and we have to understand like why, like then we're asking like, why isn't this working, right? So we've covered that. So instead of asking, what we should probably be asking is, what does this student need to be successful? And I think that's like really ultimately the support that people need. Yep. Is that understanding. We don't have to like overly complicate it all the time. I think if we can help staff and help families know that that's the question that we're asking. And if we as staff members, as teachers, can start asking that question, okay, like what does this student need to actually be successful and for it actually to go well? Yeah. And then to be able to adjust our thinking on time frames. Yep. Right? It's not going to be fixed in a week necessarily. We're not going to like figure it out like super fast. We're working on it, And sometimes that means other major things need to be put in place. But I think that's like a big one. I think if you're looking at like what kind of supports can be put in place for students and families, I still can't, I don't know how to get past the idea of like increased training for staff is ultimately going to support the families and the students. Yep. Like actually training people on what to do, how to see, how to understand what the students are going through, how to understand what is going on in the staff's own minds and bodies, all of those things. If they don't know that, then everybody's just every day reliving a new cycle of what can feel like chaos. And nobody wants to live in that, right? Nobody wants to live in those spots. So I think I don't know. I think training's a big part of it. What do you see as? I mean, 'cause you're kind of in a different spot.
Yeah, I'm in a different spot because I kind of see the bigger picture, right? And then also just I do a lot with the family end too. I would say the biggest thing that I think needs to be put in place is communication. I think when you build, it goes back to relationships.
Yeah,
I mean, we go
does.
relationships, regulation. When people buy in that you love their kid and that you are 100%, we are on the same team. I am on your team this year.
Yeah.
And we are going to get, this is hard. I don't expect you to have all the answers, and I certainly don't, but we're on this together. Like, I think that relationship piece and being super intentional, like the equity piece, some families need a lot of my time on the front end. And then guess what? Once they trust us that we have it, I don't hear from them we've got a good system. We check in or whatever, but I'm less involved. And there's some families, it's maybe less involvement now, but I need to be more involved later. Just that trust and the understanding that we can do that. I think collaboration, communication within teachers, like sometimes if we don't set up those intentional times to check in with teachers, to have the communication, to have that space for honest feedback, to start collaborating about problems and solutions. Because I've seen people fester on stuff and I'm like, well, have you talked to,
Sure.
right? Like
Yeah.
that would be a great time to let's just fix it now. Like I think the communication, collaboration, I think hands down, if we can set up forums for that and really prioritize that as we're all in this together on the same team, I think that makes huge difference.
Yeah.
And I had to even be really intentional this year, just like a shift. Like if administrators are listening, like a shift I had to make, I intentionally put a lot of meetings on the schedule for the entire year before school started. Like I blew up people's Google calendars over the summer.
I had a lot of invites.
Yeah,
that's for
people were
sure.
like,
I was
cut it
like,
out.
What in the world?
But like
Yeah.
we had to just really intentionally, like we've blocked off inclusion planning days. We've blocked off instructional days. We've blocked off grade level days. We've blocked off some times that are already built into the year. So when things start getting a little like times of the year where it felt like we're settled, but like things pop up, we already have meeting time blocked off to really start working through some of those things. So I think that's a big shift for administration to start thinking ahead of like when we need to have intentional check-in points with people to make sure things are going well. And same with families, right? Sometimes I don't hear from a family. I just reach out and say, hey, just want to check in and see how you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you know what I mean? So I think that's the other shift.
Yeah, I think those are things that are, those all make sense for sure.
Yeah.
And that's how you support. I mean, that is.
Yeah. And I think you say this all the time, with just getting kids and families to realize it's not us versus them.
Yeah.
It's a we.
Yeah.
We are in this together. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think so many families have experienced that, like us versus, us versus a school, us versus a teacher, the kid versus the teacher, the kid versus the parent. Like, there's a lot of like verses, that goes out there. And the more we can help everybody understand, like we're actually all on the same team, that goes a long way. It doesn't solve everything. Doesn't solve every problem that ever comes up, but I think it goes a long way in what those interactions are. When all of a sudden you do have a problem that comes up, it's a way different feel if everybody believes, to your point, that they care about the kid and that everybody's on the same team. Yeah. It makes a big difference.
Yeah. I liked doing this episode.
Yeah, did you?
Yeah, I did. I think we could talk like for hours about this essentially, but I think this is it, right? I think this is where we're seeing the big hang up in education right now.
Yeah.
We have kids with some behavioral needs. We're seeing people wondering to how do you fix it? How do you do, right?
Yeah.
And I think going back to it's people, not a program. And that's the tricky part.
Yeah, and I think we talk about tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 kind of things. And I think we see really intense situations sometimes that are really rough situations with like a specific teacher isn't doing whatever, or you hear about that. And our solution wants to be, well, it's that's tier 3. Kind of let's go as a real specific plan that's intense for that like one teacher. And you're like, well, maybe they're the one that like had like the really big reaction or whatever, but have we actually done the tier 1 work for our teacher, for our staff as a whole to like actually prepare them to be able to handle this stuff? And then like, if we've done like good tier 1 work, our guess would be about 80% of our teachers would be in a really good spot with all of this kind of trauma-informed care, with understanding how the brain works, with our approaches and our mindset with behavior and students in the classroom. And then there'd probably be about 10 to 15% that need a little bit extra. And then there's probably going to be about 5% of our staff that's going to actually need like real intensive work to be like, hey, listen, we got to like shape up a little bit. But it's just like a classroom. It'd be absolutely mind-blowing for us
to give
a test of a math test and be like,
you never taught you the content.
I never taught you this, and then you guys all failed. Who failed the hardest? Now I'm going to put you on like this massive math plan.
Yeah.
Like, that we're going to do. And you're like, well, that doesn't make sense. Like, you didn't even try like the tier 1 thing first. Like you didn't even try teaching them to see if that would work.
Yeah.
Does it mean that some kids in the class will end up on that anyway? Sure. Yeah, maybe. But like, you didn't start with what made the most sense. Like we just assumed that they could do it and they can't.
Yeah.
Without any instruction. I think that's what we need to correct that somehow.
Yeah, we need to get the information in the hands of the people to understand, like, how do we make some of the systematic change.
Absolutely.
I think that goes, like, what do you want educators to or what do you want people to walk away with thinking about that? We hit a lot of stuff, but
you've never had to ask that question before.
I know, I didn't even know what to do because this is your role. I switched. We should switch. You should let me know who's a better lead host. Me or I'm giving you back the reins. Episode 24 is all yours now.
Yeah. So I was thinking about this a lot, actually, even just last night. And there was a handful of years ago, actually more and more years ago now, that when I was working in a different place than where I'm working now. But one of the kind of projects I took on myself was to interact with some like district reps from different school districts. And then also like the staff from our building that I was at to kind of ask about the program that I was working in and approaches that we have that seem to be working and things like that. And so I had all this information, right? And so as I was thinking about this in terms of, programs versus people, some of the responses come out. And so I went back into a Word document, as you would know, I have.
Gosh.
And
how'd you even find that?
I found it. It's on a jump drive. It's on a physical jump drive.
Oh, wow.
And
that's like a whole nother
back
episode
and found
to talk
it.
about.
Yeah. If I lost that jump drive, all that information would be lost. So maybe that's where the cloud comes in, I guess. But I found two that I thought were interesting, right? So these aren't my own words necessarily, but I thought they were both good. One of the district reps, who actually just recently retired in the last handful of years, from the district that they were working at, said, if a student doesn't fit the mold, you adjust. You change what the shape of the mold is instead of trying to force a student into it. In most settings, if a student doesn't fit into the mold, then they're out. They either get kicked into a room somewhere or out of the building as a whole. And we just kick them out altogether. So it's this idea again, like we've got to change the mold.
Yeah.
As opposed to keep trying to jam the student into that mold. And then if they don't fit in the mold, then get out. That's what people are. That sounds harsh to say that's what people are looking for.
Yeah.
But that's why you can't say there's a program. That's why you can't say, like, if you just do these things, then it works. Because it's changing the mold to fit the student instead of trying to jam the student into the mold.
Yeah, and ultimately, who's catching these kids?
Well, that's also
right.
The problem,
That's probably another episode. But who's catching these kids? Right.
So then another guy said, who also recently retired in the last handful of years, great guy. He said, I like the fact that this is where kids are supposed to be. Now he was talking about our specific program, but I started thinking about it, and I was like, really, this is just true of school.
Yeah.
I mean, it was true of our program in that situation, but this is true of schools in general. This is where these kids are supposed to be. They're supposed to be at schools. They're supposed to be here, and they should be here, and they should fit in here. So our staff, though, chooses to be here. Now, you can go work in an office. You can go be a firefighter. You can go wherever you want to be. But you choose to be here. The kids, with all their behaviors, are okay here. A kid could show up going wild, and this is still the place where society tells them they're supposed to be. You and I have to be okay with that reality, too, if we choose to work here. We help them change that behavior, of course, but we can't be put off by who they are. And I think there's a lot to that, right? This kid didn't choose to come to whatever school they're coming to.
And we often did not choose for them to be received there, right?
We are telling them that's where they have to be.
Yeah.
I chose to be a teacher. I chose to work with kids, right? And some of those kids I'm going to naturally just get along with super well.
Yeah.
And some of them I'm not. But you know what? I chose to be here. That kid just has to be. Even the one that I don't get along with super well naturally. They have to be there. There is no choice on their end. I'm the one that has to adjust and figure it out and make it work because they're exactly where they're supposed to be at the school. Like, that's where they're supposed to be.
Yeah.
I can choose to be there or not, And I think that's hard and that can sound harsh, But man, I think if you sit around and you think about it very much, there's a whole lot of truth to that.
Yeah. To wake up every morning and choose to show up.
Yeah.
For even some of our most difficult kids to make that choice every day. And what I mean, I'm not going to read what I wrote because I think that was so good. But I think choosing that, and then when you get a team of people that choose to be there every day, that ultimately people ask, like, how do we make it work? We have a team of people that wake up every day and choose to be there, to be with kids, and failure is not an option, and we got to take care of it, right?
It doesn't mean it's easy all the time, and
No.
it doesn't mean that stuff doesn't come up, and it doesn't mean that people don't have feelings, and it doesn't mean that we don't get
not
annoyed,
in a rough patch.
and it doesn't mean, I mean, all those things happen, but if at the end of the day, like, I'm choosing to be here, like, I'm ultimately choosing to be here, and people have my back.
Yep.
People have my back, and they're going to help me along, and when I can't do it, they're going to help me, and later, when they can't do it, I'm going to help them.
Yes.
And, like, when you have that, it works. When we start thinking, like, that kid doesn't need to be here. That kid doesn't need to be here. Well, by golly, where do you want them to be? This is the school, and we say they have to be here.
Where
like,
do they?
What do you
where
want
do
them
they
to
go?
do?
Right?
Yeah, they're being who they are in the place that they're being told they have to be, and we have to be okay with that. Doesn't mean we accept it and we say there's no change. I think that's the important line at the end. We help them try to change and improve. Like that is our job.
That is our job.
We don't just accept it and say like, well, this is who they are. I guess they're just going to terrorize the whole school, or whatever it is. We don't say that, but we do understand the solution isn't just kick them out. Yeah. Because they already were where they're supposed to be.
Yeah. And this is essentially the call of work that we were chosen to go into. Yeah. To make impacts on kids. And unfortunately, you don't get to pick and choose which kids. Yeah. So here they are. This is the work that we're called to do. So yeah, that's it. All right.
Are you closing it, or am I closing it?
I'm gonna fumble through this. Let's. I think for the viewer's sake, let's see me fumble through the closing. Let's do that. Okay. Well, we're wrapping up.
Yes, we are.
We are wrapping up. So if you have questions, comments, follow us on Facebook, Instagram. We have a YouTube channel. Send questions our way, comments. Let us know what you're thinking. This is a really, really very important episode that we just did. And I think there's a lot of conversation that can happen around this, that needs to happen around this. So please reach out to us. And remember, this is like what Justin just talked about. You chose to wake up. You chose to come to do your job every day. We are choosing kids every single day. And it's important that we go out and do the work. So let's go do it.
Let's do it. Hey, everybody. Let's keep the conversation going.
Like and subscribe below and keep the comments rolling.